Do you have any idea how critical a header extension is to horsepower? Well, this time on Engine Masters, you are gonna find out. Ah, the COVID 350 is back. I love it, you love it, and we will use it this time to show you the power of header collector extensions. So this is the part that bolts to the back of your exhaust header, and this one's roughly 18 inches long. I will tell you there is a lot of power to be had or lost with the correct length header extension. So we're gonna be testing a bunch of that. I'm gonna do it on some exhaust headers that are 1 5/8, probably too small for this engine, and we're also gonna do it on some 1 3/4 inch headers, because I wanna see, does that perfect length change depending on the size of the header tube and whether the header is optimal for the engine or not. So, a whole lot of exhaust tech coming your way. Now, if you haven't seen it before, let me tell you what this engine is all about. We call it the COVID 350 because I built it during the lockdown here in California using parts that were left over in my garage. It is your standard small block Chevy. It is a 355 cubic inch small block Chevy, stock stroke, 30 thousandths overbore. The short block includes stock cast crank, 2-bolt mains, H-beam rods, forged pistons. It has 11 1/4 to 1 compression, which is what makes it great. It's got a big cam in it, a comp solid roller, 242, 248 at 50. With the rockers on here, it's got 600 lift. It has a Holley 850 carb. It has an Edelbrock Super Victor intake manifold and a Trick Moroso oil pan. Now, in the past, this has made as much as 500 horsepower, but I guarantee you we will be killing that power with this tiny set of headers on here, which we're gonna run first before we go into some collector length adjustments to either make or break some horsepower. This thing used to make 447 pound-feet and 500 horsepower.
You think it will now?
No.
Neither do I. But you might be right.
Well, it's gonna be bad. What if it's good? So here's the good news, bad news. The good news is our old configuration making 500 horsepower, 447 pound-feet, and then the red lines here are the smaller header with no collector extension whatsoever. So our power peaks with the small header and no collector are actually 442.6 pound-feet of torque at 5,000 RPM, and we made 485.9 horsepower at 6,600. I'm interested about how it meets in the middle. I thought that it would be way more worse at the bottom than at the top.
Well, the difference in peak torque's not that much if you look at it. And,
yeah, right there.
Yeah, and that's right where they get the closest. But right at the bottom of the pull, like out of the hole on drag strip kind of application, I bet you there's 50 foot-pounds there or more.
Yeah, at 4,000 RPM, what's the difference?
40 pound-feet.
Yeah, 40 pound-feet right
40.
at the hit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's a disaster. Yeah, so next step, let's bolt a 3-inch collector extension on it that's about this long.
Okay.
Troy made me a custom one, because normally they come 18 inches.
Yeah, it's kind
and
of standard.
So, who knows? All right,
Let's try it.
Let's go. Here we go. When you go to the drag strip, often it's cool to like uncork your headers, and people will do it just by disconnecting the flange right at the end of the header. What you really want is a collector extension. As we'll see, it should add a bunch of low-end power. They normally come in an 18-inch length, which is what I have here from Summit Racing. It's a pretty cheap unit. We've tacked on another 12 inches to it just so that we can see what it's going to do, so that we can progressively chop off length and see what makes the best power. So this is going to be a real simple bolt-on, just right there at the flange.
This is our wideband oxygen sensor, and on that last run it actually indicated that the air-fuel ratio was maybe a little bit lean, but it really was just because this is sitting right at the end of the collector and contaminated with fresh air. You really want to have this moved up a minimum of 12 inches from the exit point, just to try and keep fresh air from contaminating it and giving you a false reading.
Here's what's next. There's an old hot rodder's tale that says, if you paint a line of spray paint on your collector extension and you look at where it burns off, you cut it right there and that's the optimum length. But we're not gonna go directly to that mark. We're gonna progressively hack this thing down and see what's best. Well, the 30-inch collector extension would appear to have made this a whole new motor, but we haven't really looked at the data yet. Oh, snap.
Yeah.
Okay, this is why you run collector extensions. Look at the difference in torque down here. The black line is going to be what we just did with the collector extension. Red line is a no collector extension at all, and that is a lot of meat of torque. It actually, you know, did better up at the top in a certain range also. The whoop-de-doo is strange.
Yeah, it's that whole wave tuning and what it does in different spots.
But it really pumped it up right around peak horsepower.
Oh,
Yeah.
right there, yeah.
Yeah, right up in here.
So we've been talking a lot about the shapes of the curve, which once again, I always try and reinforce, they tell a much better story than the peak numbers. But the peak numbers are 441.6 pound-feet of torque at 5,100 RPM and 495.5 horsepower at 6,400 RPM. That's with the collector extensions. Let's go have a look at our painted stripe, see what it's telling us.
Oh, it'll tell us exactly where we need to cut. Maybe not now.
I'm going to ignore it. Well, let's go in there and have a look.
Yeah.
Let me get my tape measure. What do you think of my paint stripe, Steve?
Well, I mean, there's still a lot of it there, Freiberger.
But I like the way you can actually tell it's missing here clearly, and then it's kind of baked and it gets less and less and less.
Oh, yeah.
So this basically 5 inches back, let's say, but we're gonna ignore that right now, and we're gonna cut 6 inches off the back of this thing. There we go. Here we go, now 24-inch collector length extension in black and our old 30 inchers in red. You can see that we lost just a tiny, tiny little bit down here, gained here, and otherwise it's a wash. Right now we still believe that either 24 or 30 is better than no collector extension at all.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's...
I know this is gonna be hard for you, Steve, but we're gonna take another 6 inches.
What?
Not even sure what that means.
I didn't get it either.
Next up, 18 inches. Every time we cut the collector extension shorter, we're losing low-end torque. It trades places a little bit throughout the curve, and then up top, the shorter one keeps making just a hair more horsepower, just a hair. So I guess we go another 6 inches, huh?
Absolutely.
All right. Now we've got these at 12 inches overall, but look at my spray paint story here. It's actually creeping that way. Remember when I first started, it was at 5 inches, and it's now basically at 8. So the question is, how reliable is that? And also, I think you can already see that the trend of the paint burn is not working out well. Let's go dyno test it with 12-inch extensions. Loser.
Loser.
Huh. Black lines are 12-inch extensions, red lines are 18. You can see the trend. We just continue to lose more and more bottom end. In fact, this is the ugliest move we've made yet, in my opinion. So you're gonna go whack another 6?
Yeah.
Or paint stripe.
You can hold the gloves for the paint stripe.
Okay, I'll do that.
All right, we're gonna go to the paint stripe. Mr. Boulay says our new Power Peaks are 441.7 pound-feet of torque at 5,000 RPM, 488.8 horsepower is at 6,600. So you're going to compare the 8-inch extension to
The 12.
the 12. And it just continues to plummet. Look at that garbage.
Jeez.
You know what? At least it tells you the trend is all the same direction. The collector length extensions affect torque at below peak, not so much at the top end. But the other thing is, notice how each time we shorten it, the fail moves higher and higher upstream. Did you notice that?
Yep.
You really have to look at these curves and decide where you want to kill your torque. That's kind of your only
all
choice.
application.
Yeah, you're not making more horsepower at any point. So really it comes down to how much bottom end torque do you want to make or kill. So what I've learned so far is you're better to err on the side of too long of a
Right.
collector than too short. We're gonna look at best to worst. This is 24 inches to 8 inches, and look at that. Once again, like I said, top end, really above 4,500, it doesn't matter. It does a tiny bit, but not, I mean, that doesn't alter your life. This does. Well, now the question is, when we put the 1 3/4 inch chassis headers on this thing, are they better than the 1 5/8? And is the answer about collector length the same? I know that the collector is going to be better, but is the length going to end up being the same?
I see what the question is, whether it's still the 24,
Right.
or whether it turns into an 18 or a 12 or something like that on a larger tube. So,
Exactly.
one way to find out.
So now we're gonna go on both the 1 5/8 headers and install the 1 3/4 larger ones, and I guess we'll run them first with open, no extensions on them as well.
Just the way we did this.
All right, let's swap it out. Here's the new hotness. So the headers on this thing have tube diameters of 1 5/8 inches, and these are 1 3/4. So the higher the RPM, the larger the displacement, the more power you're making, the more you tend to like a larger header tube diameter. The thing that is consistent with these two is that they both have a 3-inch diameter collector. The other thing about this new bigger header is that I had mentioned that I measured out the entire length of these. These are on average 2 inches longer than the other as far as the tube, but also look at the difference in the collector itself. The distance from here to here is longer on the larger header than it is on the shorter one by quite a bit. So it's almost got some built-in extra collector extension length on it. That extra length right there is gonna make more difference in the ultimate overall collector length than it would as far as the diameter or length of this tubing. I'd say that's a better header.
Yeah.
Well, that answers our question about whether the 1 3/4 inch header is more appropriately sized, as you would say, for this engine. What we're looking at here, by the way, is the 1 5/8 header in red and the 1 3/4 header in black. You can see the 1 5/8 was better down here below 4,500 RPM, but when we started to really move some air, obviously the 1 3/4 is a whole lot better.
It's the old myth of smaller tube diameter is better for low-end torque, right?
Yeah, in this case it did, which is interesting because it also has shorter overall length than the larger header. But I would choose the 1 3/4 inch header.
Oh, look at that top end charge. I mean, it's clearly superior by a pretty significant amount.
Our peak power numbers now with the 1 3/4 inch header are 497.2 horsepower at 6,700 RPM. The torque is 446.7 at 5,000 RPM. And the other thing that I've noted is that the RPM at peak power hasn't really changed based on the header tube diameter.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. So now we go put on the 30-inch collector extension on this thing. Here we go with the 30-incher. So we're gonna go 1 3/4 header versus 1 3/4 header. This is what we did with the collector extension. Same exact trend we saw with the other header. It only matters below peak torque. So of course, what you're looking at here is the black line with the big collector extension, red line without, and that's just a massive gain in that bottom end torque. And I'm gonna make a prediction. I've learned not to make predictions on the show, but wait for it.
I know
That's
where
gonna
you're
get worse and worse as we cut the collector shorter.
What?
Yeah! But I guess we gotta do the same thing. Wanna take 6
Yeah,
inches
we'll go
down?
through it. Sure, absolutely. Well, Troy does. I
Troy.
don't.
Oh, he's gonna ding your dyno. Watch. Oh, he didn't.
He knows what he's doing.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. That was awesome. That was the greatest changeover in the history of the show. All right, thanks to Troy, the Chop Goldie, we've now got 24-inch extensions. Sorry, we're gonna overlay the 30-inch collector extension with this bigger header. And sure enough, the difference is less, but the longer pipe had more torque.
Wait a minute, no, it's the other way
Game
around.
changer. I assumed, and you know what happens when you assume? I made a chump out of myself. The shorter collector extension made more torque at the bottom end. That is the 24-incher, and the red line is the 30-incher. The plot thickens.
You know, it's a combination of length and diameter, and we found something where it's filling the cylinder better at that engine speed is all there is.
That's all there is. That's really interesting.
The 24 is better.
We're just baffled by this because the trend we saw the whole time, even with the 30-incher that we just tested, was that the longer extension was going to make more torque below the RPM at peak torque, and that did not happen this time. We shortened it up 6 inches and made more bottom end.
Now the next 6 inches going to 18 is really going to be interesting.
Yeah.
Nobody can predict that one because it just threw us this curveball.
Do we do 2, 4? I don't want to blow past some data that we wouldn't otherwise capture.
Why not 3? We could split the.
You want to do 3?
Yeah. That way it's
It's
half
6
our
and
increment.
6. That's good. Go 3, Troy. 3. Very interesting. Every test we've done this far has been 6 inches, and look at that, that's 3 inches. This low end torque, again, the torque below the RPM at peak torque, once again, climbed with the shorter collector.
Yeah.
It made more power than the smaller header. This blue line, that's with the 30-incher. The red line's the 24, and now we're at 21.
So we just keep adding torque.
Yeah.
And the other thing we just learned is only 3 inches made a measurable difference. As a matter of fact, the blue line to the red line is 6 inches. The red line to the black line is 3 inches.
Well, the only choice now is another 3 inches.
Another 3.
Right. But you know what? We're basically trying to find the ideal tuned length by trial and error. Like if you had a
Trombone, right?
a trombone,
Yeah.
you know.
Which actually is a lesson about the pressure wave in there because it makes a different sound, longer or shorter, because the pressure wave is coming out longer or shorter. It's the same exact thing we're doing here.
There's also inertial ram where it's packing, and it can change that where it's actually filling the cylinder from the intake side more effectively because what the exhaust is doing.
Right.
First and second wave reflective.
Yeah.
All of that stuff that we
Yeah.
don't understand, but that we can
Inertial
test.
ram, reflective wave, all of that. All the stuff that we can't see that we wish we could.
Wow, this just became great.
Yeah, this is fun.
It really did. So 3 more inches. Troy. This is getting really exciting because that looks like that was another big improvement in the overall average power. Look at that, we're making 498 horsepower now and 442.2 pound-feet of torque. We're gonna compare our new 18-inch collector with our old 21-inch collector. Look at that.
To smooth that and fill that in.
So The gains are getting smaller, but the trend continues with this larger header that when we shorten that collector, it's picking up the torque right here. The black line is the shorter 18-inch collector, red line is the longer 21-incher. And look what's happening up here is they come together around peak torque and then diverge again afterwards. This is pretty
These changes
awesome.
are pretty significant. You know, I'd like to say that the next change is kind of like timing and it's going to do almost nothing and we know we're in the sweet spot.
That's what I feel.
Every change we're making, it's been fairly significant. So the next change again is going to be really interesting.
Well, the averages came up. Like average torque with the 21-inch tube, 417.6. Average throughout the curve with the 18, 419.7. That's 2.1, which on average is...
That's significant.
Yeah.
And like Steve was saying, the curve is just nicer. It filled in some of that dip that we had been seeing with the longer collector extension.
Yeah, here.
Yeah, and at the top too.
So interesting.
We just got to go cut another 3 off.
So we're gonna
Yeah.
go 15 and then 12.
And that should tell us a whole bunch right there. That's
Yeah.
when the change will, I think.
We'll catch the
it'll
change
switch at the
somewhere
other
in there.
end.
Right now, it's the out of the box 18-inch length.
Yeah, and it worked good.
Yeah. Now we've got it down to 15 inches. We're trying to find that perfect length to make the COVID 350 the best it can be.
That might be the best right here.
So here, the 18-inch extension is red. The new 15-incher is black.
We're close.
We're right, and I mean,
But I think we might be coming down the other side right now.
I think so.
well, you look at the peaks, and we're actually up at peak in both cases. We're now making 442.7 pound-feet of torque at 5,000, which is up by half, and we're making 499 horsepower at 6,600 RPM, which is up by 0.4. Essentially, the performance in the car, this is the same.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So I think we're at the point of no return. We don't really need to keep hacking this thing down unless you just want to find out where it does
I think
fall
we need to
off.
make one more cut.
Okay.
Me too, I agree.
I think one more 3-incher,
Okay.
just to see if we move down to lose some more torque and move, you know, lose a little bit somewhere else, just to make sure we're on the other side of that window.
But nevertheless, the big story is still that the trend inverted.
Inverted, yeah,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
has something to do with the diameter. I'm not that smart. I don't know.
So let's go hack another 3. And now we're down to 12 inches. I think this is the tipping point.
I think it is.
Here comes the graph, and we got 496.9 horsepower, 444.1 pound-feet of torque, which happens to be our highest one yet, but that's not the story as usual. The overlay will be the story. So red lines, 15-inch, black lines, 12-inch. How do you call it? 15-inch. The 15 was better. We are at the tip-over point. So now we're gonna compare 12 inches versus 18 inches. Okay, black line is 12 inches, red line 18 inches. Okay, so once we hit 18, we got to the point of diminishing return on big changes, but prior to that, we definitely saw an inverted trend
Yes.
from length versus torque. So I've actually learned a massive amount from this, and I guess the big thing is that I didn't think that pressure wave tuning of like F1 and Pro Stock type, you know, information would matter this much to an average engine like this.
I think that always matters. I mean, I think it's physics and it's going to apply to almost any engine.
Yeah.
That's all part of the track. I mean, from the top of the choke horn there to the end of the collector, it's all part of it.
Which is the other thing I learned, because I believe if we put a tunnel ram on this, meaning a big long intake runner different than what's there, it's going to change this again.
Absolutely. And then throw
Yeah.
another camshaft in it.
It's
Changes
going to
it
change
again.
it all again.
So.
And so that's the third thing is, well, there's many things that we test that we feel we can derive a trend from and give people advice. Yeah. And I've learned you can never say always in this engine stuff, but we can see trends. In this case, the only trend that I can tell you knowing what I know right now is you have to try it on your own car.
But it just goes to show you that all of this stuff matters every time, no matter what. And this is the difference between engine development and engine testing.
Right.
Yeah. And that development, as you say, would be different with a different intake and cam. It's fascinating. Yeah. And that we were able to see this kind of difference just by changing the header tube diameter. We would normally go, oh yeah, that 1 3/4 is going to make way more power, and it did, but who would have known that we would have seen that difference in the collector?
Yeah, and if it's that sensitive to pipe length, imagine the full exhaust system in your car and how that would affect your performance or your torque down low or up high or what have you.
Yeah. Well, but I guess the last thing I learned, if you really don't know, I still think you're better off with an out-of-the-box 18-inch collector than you are with nothing at all.
You can't hardly go wrong with an 18.
Yeah.
I mean, you're at least in that zone. And I think we've seen over and over, with nothing there, it just kills the bottom.
It's no good.
But if you have a 5,000 stall converter, who cares?
Yeah.
This turned out way better than I expected.
Good.
Yeah, this was
Fun
awesome.
stuff.
Any final thoughts?
10 more questions.
Right.
And no more answers.
A lot of times development is cut and try, and that's what we found out here. You just have to zero in on what actually works.
Yeah.
It's undeniable.
But the thing we tested and proved is that it makes a difference, and you need to find out if you really care about ultimate performance.
Absolutely.
Yep, which is what we kind of do every single time on Engine Masters. Your battery dying?
Battery.
Oh yeah, you need a new battery.
Thought you were better than that, Troy?
I grounded battery.
Comes in here with the sawzall with the dead battery. Can you believe it? That was the header cutting scene. You know? No, I mean, I come over here. I want to get this header cut.
There we go.
Oh, hey, nice work, Troy. You got that cut in a jiffy.